All right, chapter 15, part 1 ended off a little abruptly. Sorry about that. Little technical difficulties. Here we go. 15, chapter 2. I'm on the top of, I'm actually toward the middle of page 201. They are standing outside the jail. The kids are, and they see Atticus sitting underneath the jail under a light. I made to run, but Jem caught me. Don't go to him, he said. He might not like it. He's all right. Let's go home. I just wanted to see where he was. We were taking a shortcut across the square when 4 dusty cars came in from the Meridian Highway, moving slowly in a line. They went around the square, past the bank building, and stopped in front of the jail. Nobody got out. We saw Atticus look up from his newspaper. He closed it, folded it deliberately, dropped it in his lap. He pushed his hat to the back of his head. He seemed to be expecting them. Come on, whispered Jem. We streaked across the square, across the street, until we were in the shelter of the Jitney Jungle door. Jem peeked up the sidewalk. We can get closer, he said. We ran to Tyndall's hardware door, near enough, at the same time discreet. In ones and twos, men got out of the cars. Shadows became substance as light revealed solid shapes moving toward the jail door. Atticus remained where he was. The men hid him from view. He in there, Mr. Finch? A man said. He is, we heard Atticus answer, and he is asleep. Don't wake him up. In obedience to my father, there followed what I later realized was a sickeningly comic aspect of an unfunny situation. The men talked in near whispers. Oh, sorry. Huh. You know what we want, another man said. Get aside from that door, Mr. Finch. You can turn around and go home again, Walter, Atticus said pleasantly. Heck Tate's around here somewhere. Hell he is, said another man. Heck's bunched so deep in the woods they won't get out till morning. Indeed? Why so? Said Atticus. Called him off on a snipe hunt, was the succinct answer. Didn't you think of that, Mr. Finch? So, those men are there to kill Tom Robinson. That's why they're there. Or Atticus if he is in the way. Atticus is there to protect Tom. They say, Atticus says, hey, Heck Tate's around here. The police are around here. They'll be here soon. And they say, no, we called him off on a snipe hunt, which is like a wild goose chase. Like, hey, there's something going on over here. And so they all run out to the woods. And then they get out there and there's nothing there. The real crime is in town. So Atticus is truly alone here. Didn't you think of that, Mr. Finch? I thought about it, but I didn't believe it. Well, then, my father's voice was still the same. That changes things, doesn't it? It do, another deep voice said, its owner a shadow. Do you really think so? This was the second time I heard Atticus ask that question in 2 days. Really? Huh. And it meant somebody's man would get jumped. This was too good to miss. I broke away from Jem and ran as fast as I could to Atticus. Jem shrieked and tried to catch me, but I had a lead on him and Dill. I pushed my way through the dark, smelly bodies and burst into the circle of light. Hey, Atticus! I thought he would have a fine surprise, but his face killed my joy. A flash of plain fear was going out of his eyes, but returned when Dill and Jem wriggled into the light. There was a smell of stale whiskey and pigpen about. When I glanced around, I discovered that these men were strangers. They were not the people I saw last night. Hot embarrassment shot through me. I had leaped triumphantly into a ring of people I had never seen before. Atticus got up from his chair, but he was moving slowly, like an old man. He put the newspaper down very carefully, adjusting its creases with lingering fingers. They were trembling a little. Go home, he said. Take Scout and Dill home. We were accustomed to prompt, if not always, cheerful acquiescence. Acquiesce? What does acquiesce mean? Submit or agree. We were accustomed to prompt, if not always cheerful acquiescence or agreement to Atticus's instructions, but from where he stood, Jem was not thinking of budging. Go home, I said. Jem shook his head. As Atticus's fists went to Jem's hips, so did Jem's, and as they faced each other, I could see a little resemblance between them. Jem's soft brown hair and eyes, his oval face and snug-fitting ears were our mothers, contrasting oddly with Atticus's graying black hair and square-cut features, but they were somehow alike. Mutual defiance made them alike. Son, I said go home. Jem shook his head. I'll send him home. A burly man grabbed Jem roughly by the collar. He yanked Jem nearly off of his feet. "Don't you touch him!" I kicked the man swiftly. Barefooted, I was surprised to see him fall back in real pain. I intended to kick his shin, but aimed too high. Where do you think Scout kicked him? Yep, in that spot. Sorry, boys. So we get this protection here. So first of all, we got to back up here. Atticus wants Jem to go home. Why? He's trying to protect them. Jem refuses to go home. Why? Because he's protecting Atticus. So they're both this mutual defiance. They're both trying to help each other. And Scout jumps in there because this guy grabs Jem, like picks him up. And Scout is like, nobody is going to hurt my brother. And so she kicks him in a little higher spot. Sorry, boys. "That'll do, Scout." Atticus put his hand on my shoulder. "Don't kick, folks, no," he said as I was pleading justification. "Ain't nobody gonna do Jem that way," I said. "All right, Mr. Finch, get him out of here," someone growled. "You got 15 seconds to get him out of here." It's late, I'm tired. In the midst of this strange assembly, Atticus stood trying to make Jem mind him. "I ain't going," was his steady answer to Atticus's threats and requests, and finally, "Please, Jem, take them home." I was getting a bit tired of that, but felt Jem had his own reasons for doing as he did, in view of the prospects and consequences once Atticus did get him home. I looked around the crowd. It was a summer's night, but the men were dressed, most of them in overalls and denim shirts buttoned up to their collars. I thought they must be cold-natured, as their sleeves were unrolled and buttoned at the cuffs. Some wore hats pulled firmly down over their ears. They were sullen-looking, sleepy-eyed men who seemed unused to late hours. I sought once more for a familiar face, and at the center of the semicircle, I found one. "Hey, Mr. Cunningham!" The man did not hear me, it seemed. "Hey, Mr. Cunningham, how's your entailment getting along?" Mr. Walter Cunningham's legal affairs were well known to me. Atticus had once described them at length. The big man blinked and hooked his thumbs in his overall straps. He seemed uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and looked away. My friendly overture had fallen flat. Mr. Cunningham wore no hat, and the top half of his forehead was white in contrast to his sun-scorched face, which led me to believe that he wore one most days. He shifted his feet, clad in heavy work shoes. "Don't you remember me, Mr. Cunningham? I'm Jean Louise Finch. You brought us some hickory nuts one time, remember?" I began to sense the futility one feels when unacknowledged by a chance acquaintance. "I go to school with Walter," I began again. "He's your boy, ain't he? Ain't he, sir?" Mr. Cunningham was moved to a faint nod. He did know me, after all. "He's in my grade," I said, "and he does right well. He's a good boy," I added. "A real nice boy. We brought him home for dinner one time. Maybe he told you about me. I beat him up one time, but he was real nice about it. Tell him hey for me, won't you?" Atticus had said it was the polite thing to talk to people about what they were interested in, not about what you were interested in. Pause. That's another one of those Atticus life lessons. You should always talk to people about what they're interested in, not about what you're interested in. Mr. Cunningham displayed no interest in his son, so I tackled his entailment once more in a last-ditch effort to make him feel at home. "Entailments are bad," I was advising him when I slowly awoke to the fact that I was addressing the entire aggregation. The men were all looking at me. Some had their mouths half open. Atticus had stopped poking Jem. They were standing together beside Dill. Their attention amounted to fascination. Atticus's mouth even was half open, an attitude he had once described as uncouth or impolite. Our eyes met and he shut it. "Well, Atticus, I was just saying to Mr. Cunningham that entailments are bad and all that, but you said not to worry. It takes a long time sometimes, that you'd all ride it out together." I was slowly drying up, wondering what idiocy I had committed. Entailments seemed all right enough for living room talk. I began to feel sweat gathering at the edges of my hair. I could stand anything but a bunch of people looking at me. They were quite still. "What's the matter?" I asked. Atticus said nothing. I looked around and up at Mr. Cunningham, whose face was equally impassive. Then he did a peculiar thing. He squatted down and took me by both shoulders. "I'll tell him you said, 'Hey, little lady,'" he said. Then he straightened up and waved a big paw. "Let's clear out," he called. "Let's get going, boys." As they had come in ones and twos, the men shuffled back to their ramshackle cars. Doors slammed, engines coughed, and they were gone. Little pause. So those guys are there to kill Tom Robinson. Atticus is trying to protect him. Jem is trying to protect Atticus. Scout doesn't get it. She looks and, "Oh, I know you. I know you." And she starts talking. And he, in mob mentality, in a mob, the power of a mob is the anonymity. When they're anonymous, they will do things that they normally don't do. These are farmers. These are good, hardworking men in the light of day and in their normal daily lives. They have integrity. They do the best they can. But here in this situation, when it comes to a black man accused of raping a white woman, and in this situation right here, they are outside of themselves. And what Scout does is her innocence reminds them of their humanity. Her innocence reminds them of their humanity, and she doesn't even mean to do it. Atticus and Dill and Jem are standing there like, what's happening? Right? And here we get the kind of the aftermath of that. I turned to Atticus, but he had gone to the jail and was leaning against it with his face to the wall. I went to him and pulled his sleeve. "Can we go home now?" He nodded, produced a handkerchief, gave his face a going over, and blew his nose violently. "Mr. Finch?" A soft, husky voice came from the darkness above. "They gone?" Atticus stepped back and looked up. "They've gone," he said. "Get some sleep, Tom. They won't bother you any more." From a different direction, another voice cut crisply through the night. "You're damn tootin' they won't. I had you covered the whole time, Atticus." Mr. Underwood and a double-barreled shotgun were leaning out of his window above the Macomb Tribune office. It was long past my bedtime, and I was growing quite tired. It seemed that Atticus and Mr. Underwood would talk for the rest of the night, Mr. Underwood out the window and Atticus up at him. Finally, Atticus returned, switched off the light above the jail door, and picked up his chair. "Can I carry it for you, Mr. Finch?" asked Dill. He had not said a word the entire time. "Why, thank you, son." Walking toward the office, Dill and I fell into step behind Atticus and Jem. Dill was encumbered by the chair, and his pace was slower. Atticus and Jem were well ahead of us, and I assumed that Atticus was giving Jem hell for not going home. But I was wrong. As they passed under the streetlight, Atticus reached out and massaged Jem's hair, his one gesture of affection. That's like tussling his hair. I want to talk about the 3 levels of understanding here. So, Jem gets it. He wants to go in the middle of the night. He's worried about Atticus. He's checking on him. He stands his ground. He will not let Atticus deal with this by himself. He is protecting him. He fully understands. Dill gets it. He understands, but he doesn't take any action. He doesn't know what to do. We'll get to Dill in a minute. Scout has no clue what's going on. She has no idea that they're there to kill him. She's just being Scout. She's being 5. And or 6 or 7 or whatever old she is. She looks up and sees somebody she knows, and her innocence and her politeness and her manners bring back his humanity. And he kneels down and puts his hand on his shoulders and is like, "I'll tell him. Let's go, guys. We're not going to kill this guy in front of these kids. We're not going to do it." And they leave. And even Atticus is astounded. He wipes his face with a handkerchief because he's sweaty and or tears because he's just like, what the heck is going on? And then you don't hear anything. Well, Mr. Underwood is there, and he's got a shotgun leaning out above there. That tells you how dangerous this situation was. In addition, we don't hear from Dill until the very end. And Dill says, "Can I take your chair? Can I carry your chair?" So like Dill's like, Jem did this. He stood up for him. He fought, he did this. Scout made them all go away. I want to help. I got to do something. Can I carry your chair for you? And Atticus is like, "Sure." Right? So Dill gets it. That's why he asked to carry the chair, but he can't act on it in that moment. He's not strong enough. He's not mature enough. He's not involved enough. He doesn't get it enough to do that, take action. But Jem gets it and he takes action. And then Scout's like, "Jem is going to get in hella trouble when he's going home." And Atticus reaches out and ruffles his hair as kind of a thank you. Like, okay. Remember, this is Sunday night. Chapter 16 starts with them getting home from this, going to bed the next morning, and then the trial starts right after that. Please go watch the Zoom of Mitzi and I, our little fishbowl. We do a lot more in depth of this chapter. There's a lot more going on that I didn't get into, but Mitzi and I go back and forth and talk about it. So please do that. I'll see you for chapter 16.